Have you seen the headlines talking about how we've had the slowest spring selling season in over a decade? Well, although that may be true, that's not exactly what's happening now. So what I want to talk about today in this market update is we're going to we're going to talk a little bit about what the spring selling season was like. And that's basically March, April through June. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm also going to talk about what's happening right now because I would say things are much different than they were at that point. So anyway, this is Ben Larson with the Larson Realty Group, and thanks for joining me today for this market update. I'm going to give you some information on what we're actually seeing and what's happening. And even here, we did see a lot of that slowdown back in the spring, so I don't disagree with that, but we are seeing quite an uptick. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to touch on what may be happening with rates, what's the Fed decision that's looming, and kind of how that relates to mortgage rates. So we're going to get into some of those things and talk about where things may be heading as well. First, going back to the slowdown, and just giving a specific example, one example specifically. I have a listing, and we went on the market right around May, that very slow period of time. And what happened was we got very little activity, almost no showings in June and July. So I'm thinking, well, shoot, we got another slow month coming. But something happened, just kind of like a lip switched and switch flipped, and things just took off. So we started getting, probably the second week of August, just started getting calls and showings, and it just kept going and kept picking up. And for the last probably 30, 40 days, we've been getting 4 to 5 showings a week on a listing that had almost, other than open houses, had 0 showings in 2 months. And that was, we've had rates, which I'll touch on a little bit more. Rates did dip a little recently. This was before that even happened. You can get that information that we're seeing on a local day-to-day basis. And multiple agents have seen right about that same time, that same pickup. Listings that have been sitting for weeks with almost no traffic, all of a sudden it just picked up. So that's what's been happening. And so it's continued. And so definitely very happy to see that. It doesn't mean we are above where we were before the spring slowdown. Things were moving along pretty well earlier in the year. But we have definitely picked up from where we were these last few months. And a lot of the headlines are not covering that. A lot of the online articles, newspapers, they're not covering that. I think it just takes them a little time to catch up, and it's not all over the country, so that's why it does apply here locally. So that's why we want to get follow, subscribe here, get this information when it comes out quickly, so you kind of stay in the know. But that's what we're seeing right now and what's happening with the pickup in activity. So the next thing I wanted to get into, we've seen this pickup in activity, but why is that happening? And sometimes we don't really care a whole lot why it's happening. It's happening, but it's interesting if you've been following rates at all. We have had a decline these last couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, maybe even 2 weeks plus. We have seen rates declining, and I'll get into a little bit about why that was. But I saw activity picking up on my listing and other agents I talked to even before that. But that now we've heard Fed's talking about cutting the Fed rates, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. Which probably is a good time to get into that before I get too much more on interest rates. But the Fed, they talk about cutting the Fed rate, and a lot of people think, oh, that's directly related to mortgage rates. They do that, mortgage rates are going to decline. That's not necessarily the case. They aren't completely tied together. They do relate to each other, but you won't see just like a regular 30-year fixed purchase mortgage loan drop in interest rates because of that. Now, on the flip side, here's where that may be a benefit though. Mortgage lenders, they see what's happening with the Fed, so they know what's coming, and even though they're not tied to each other, they do come into play, and they do relate to each other. So it also makes lenders feel a little more comfortable where things are going with the Fed and with the economy and everything. That they what we call, they bake the rate in already, and so depending on what's happening or what they're predicting to happen with certain announcements, you may already have rates declining or rising, depending on what that could be. Right now, the sentiment is pretty good moving forward. So the last couple of weeks, that's why we've seen these drop. And a lot of buyers, I don't know, that's you said some people were getting ahead of it. They kind of saw that coming, but a lot of buyers think that the Fed rate is tied to mortgage rates, and so they're just waiting for the Fed announcement for them to actually drop that, and they think rates are then going to go down more at that point. And because we've seen a pretty decent decline, probably 0.25%, give or take, check with your lender, it changes all the time, but we've seen that drop already, and it does. I'm not trying to say it won't still decline a little bit more, but we may have already seen the mortgage rate decline for this Fed announcement, and if that does cut the rate a quarter point like most people are expecting, that would be amazing. But most people are predicting a quarter of a point. So if you do have a HELOC, that will improve a little bit. If you're looking to refi, if you bought these last couple of years, you could be eligible for a refi. Rates are probably better than when you did buy. But if you're just looking to purchase and you're waiting for, or even as a refi, you're waiting for either one, waiting for the Fed announcement, hoping that they're going to go down a lot more at that point. I don't think that's going to happen. So just wanted to mention that. That's kind of where we stand with interest rates. I wanted to explain a little bit about the Fed, what's happening with what they're doing, and how that kind of the implications that has on mortgage rates loans, lines of credit, things like that that might apply to you in the housing world. So that's just a kind of a quick synopsis of what's happening, what has been happening with rates. We've seen a good decline. Don't know that we'll see a ton more just because the Fed cuts the rates, but hopefully we will start to see a gradual, continual decline over the rest of this year going into next year. So that's kind of where we are there on what I'm seeing here with rates. And of course, that's playing into, we've seen a good amount of activity picking up. Buyers, a lot of buyers that weren't in the market are now getting pre-approved. They may not be out seeing homes yet. We're starting to get pre-approved, and we are seeing some of that activity pick up. And so now that we talked about what's happened, what's happening very recently and right now, let's talk about where things may be going. And again, there's no guarantees. There's always things out on the horizon that could derail some of this positivity that's happening with rates. But we do feel the momentum. Like I said, the sentiment, I think, is that things are going in the right direction. Maybe we've turned a corner. We're going to have bumps. The rates will probably go up and down, but generally trend down through the end of this year, and then into and probably through next year. So we're hoping that will be the case. That will open up some more inventory. That will definitely create some more demand. And that's what I really wanted to touch on, is there are a lot of buyers I'm talking to that are saying, oh, I'm just going to wait for rates to get below 6, or I'm going to wait for them to get down into the mid 5s, or whatever it may be. I don't think any of us, or very few of us, think it's going to get back into 3s or down that low. But they're going to improve, and people are waiting for that breaking point where that may be. What I'm telling people is, because I hear buyers say that, and I hear lots of buyers say that, but buyers don't hear lots of buyers say that. So they hear themselves saying that, and it sounds smart. It sounds like the right thing to do for rates. But if you think about, well, that's what everybody else is doing. Should I really be doing that as well? What do you think is going to happen when everybody else says, okay, rates are where I want them to be, I'm going to jump back in? Now there's all kinds of people coming in. And what's that mean? We have a little bit better inventory than we have over the last months or year or two, but we still don't have a ton of inventory and a ton of great inventory. People that want nice homes and nice areas, all of that. So I just ask them, what do you think is going to happen when all those people jump in just like you did? You think you're the only one waiting for that? No, I'm talking to lots of people that are waiting for that. So I tell them, if you can afford it, where the rates are right now, and the perfect home comes along, but if a home comes along that checks most of the boxes and is better than anything you've seen since you've been looking and just browsing or watching, don't pass it up. That's my point right now. I'm not saying rates are going to drop dramatically next year, but they are most likely going to improve over time. And when they do get better to a certain point, there is going to be a lot of demand. I would expect there to be multiple offers. We're going to get bidding wars again. We're going to get back to that point. So that's why I recommend, if the right home comes along right now, you're ready to go, you can afford it, jump on it. It's probably going to be more affordable moving forward. If you're waiting for it and you think, even if you think prices, don't think that's going to happen. I think we may be past that. It may dip, which may flatline a little, but I think we're past them going down. But if you're trying to time something going down and the market turns, it turns really quickly. Every time it's turned over the last 2, 3, 5 years, it's turned quickly, and no one knows it's turned until we're already past. So going down and back up, and you don't hear about it until realize it until we're here, and then you got to wait for that home to come along again. When now we're here, and now then it goes higher and higher, and so you may end up with a little better rate if you finally get that home where you win a multiple offer situation and you waive all your contingencies and you do all this stuff. You might end up getting that home, but chances are, even if it's at a lower rate, probably going to be at a high price, and you're probably going to end up in a higher payment, even though your rate is better. So is that really worth it? So lesson of the day, I say this all the time, might not be the only time this is the lesson of the day, it could be the lesson of days. Definitely, if the right home comes along, you're ready to go, and it fits your situation and you can afford it, I say don't pass it up. Go for it. Don't stop looking because you're waiting for rates. I say have your pre-approvals ready, be on the lookout. If that comes along, especially if you need to sell also, I definitely wouldn't wait. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Hopefully that it all pans out that way. I think that's the way most economists and experts are leaning as well. None of us have a crystal ball, but we got to look at what's the most likely thing to happen, and I do think that's the most likely thing to happen. Anyway, hope that was helpful. Definitely subscribe, reach out, send some comments below. Let me know what else you want to hear about, any questions you may have. Turn on notifications so that you can be notified when I release more of these, and that way you can stay up to date on everything as soon as possible when it's coming out. Because I'm going to give you these updates, and they're going to be very real time, what's happening in the market at the moment. So thanks everybody. This is Ben Larson of Larson Realty Group. Have a great day.